But I think it is worth pointing out that like this whole axis of resistance philosophy, this whole approach seems to have mostly functioned, certainly over the past year, but I think probably for some time longer than that, it has mostly functioned in helping Israel commit genocide.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Rory, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How are you this week?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. I had a really interesting evening last night. While most of the country was watching the vice presidential debate, I decided not to bother. And I went and saw sort of the book launch event for Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book at the Apollo Theater here in Harlem. And it was really worthwhile. For those who aren't aware, Ta-Nehisi Coates is I think he wouldn't like this terminology, saying it is reductive, but he's sort of the most popular or most well-known writer about race issues in the United States, akin to the Black Lives Matter moment. And he's now back with a new book where he's really diving in on Palestine, which is actually a tremendously courageous thing for him to do, frankly. He minimizes it and talks about, I have to. I'd jeopardize my soul otherwise. But I mostly bought tickets to this kind of like I wanted to throw him some money as he immolated his career. It was really compelling. His book's doing very well. I think it's number 3 on Amazon at this point. Not like number 3 in like.
Oh, is it actually selling?
Oh yeah, selling quite well.
He's a very obscure subsection.
I don't think it's an obscure subsection. I think it's on like Amazon entirely. So it's very interesting.
Amazon proper.
Yeah, it's a rare example of bravery from somebody who's got some real things
Potential to lose.
Yeah. So it was impressive, and even better, I'd never seen the man speak before, and I was pretty impressed. So
sounds fantastic, but sadly, it's a topic we'll be talking about today because it's just gotten bad to worse.
Yes. Today we're going to be talking about. Again, I guess we did so just a few weeks back or a month or so back, talking about the state of things between Israel, Lebanon, Iran, and of course Palestine being shoved into the corner. In part, the point of what Israel is doing here. Things have accelerated. Things have gotten worse. It's interesting because even I have gotten a little sick of my sort of calling wolf on this sort of broad regional war between the United States and Iran. But it is interesting just seeing how much more scope there is for things to go wrong and get horrible on the way to this war, even if we don't end up getting it. And we've seen some pretty major developments in the region just over the past week. September 27th, we had the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, who's one of the more famous figures in the region. This is the Secretary General of Hezbollah, as was. And then we had on October 1st, we had the morning, sort of in the early hours of the morning, Israel launched its long-threatened ground invasion of Lebanon, and then
Southern Lebanon?
Yes, southern Lebanon. And then on October 1st in the evening, we got, finally, honestly, about a month late, Iran's retaliation against everything that Israel had been doing for the past 2 months. Unfortunately, that is sort of the state of where we are. You'll be listening to this on Monday the 7th or something like that. And we are speaking to you from the past, from October 2nd. It's entirely possible that a lot of new things have happened. In fact, it's quite likely that a lot of new things have happened.
Let's hope nothing has happened and things have de-escalated.
That would be ideal.
But sadly, I think we'll be hideously out of date.
Yes, I expect to be hideously out of date. But I think we can talk about this moment because specifically the killing of Hassan Nasrallah and the wiping out of most of Hezbollah's leadership is tremendously significant and worth talking about all on its own. What this is going to lead to, we might tease out a little bit at the end of the episode. But I think that there's enough that's important that has happened to discuss that this is still worthwhile, no matter how much worse, if there's a sunken U.S. aircraft carrier or if all of oil production is in flames. Both of those things are very possible by the time this recording is published. Not saying they're definitely going to happen, but they're possible. Regardless, it's worth talking about. What we have to concede is a pretty striking Israeli victory here against Hezbollah, a organization that has sort of functioned as the big bogeyman in the region for about 18 years now. It's not gone. Oh boy, is it not gone. But the decapitation strikes that have been carried out against its leadership and what seems to be an extraordinary Israeli intelligence victory are very much worth talking about. Also, we want to talk about the timing here. I think it's pretty clear, and I think the title of this episode will probably be Israel's October Surprise. I think that this is absolutely intended to influence the U.S. election and to sabotage the hopes of one Kamala Harris. It's been quite clear. Netanyahu has been rather openly.
Because I think, didn't Trump go up by half a point with the Iranian attacks?
Oh, I haven't seen the polling. That's entirely possible. Actually, I wouldn't expect any here on October 2nd. Or are you talking about in April? That wouldn't surprise me if you're talking about the attacks in April.
Yes. No. Well, I think it's with the invasion into Lebanon. Things look better for Trump than Kamala.
Yeah, I think just the fact that the case that the Republicans are making is that the world is out of control under war-crazy Joe Biden. I would certainly quibble with that on a range of metrics. In fact, I do think the world is spinning out of control a little bit, though it's exactly what the United States government intended. And the idea that Donald Trump is somehow a force for stability and peace is ludicrous. But that's one of the main stories that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are selling, is that the world is more dangerous and chaotic under Joe Biden and would be as well under Kamala Harris. And to have a major regional war, if not fully break out with the participation of the United States, but escalate the way that it has been in recent months, is very bad for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Or, you know what? Or it could mean nothing. Who knows? This is the theory that Trump and Netanyahu are working with, and this is very much intended. This escalation that is 100%, I feel like we have to emphasize this because in U.S. media it's sort of carefully hidden. This stuff that is 100% intended by Israel to sabotage the Democratic Party and to get Donald Trump reelected. Just on the case of media, just one thing that popped into my head, it's extraordinary how much effort is put in by U.S. cable news and by even the print media in the United States, chiefly the New York Times, into obscuring how much Israel is in the driver's seat of what's happening here and how much they are trying to make things happen here. There was a New York
Times. They keep emphasizing all these countries are attacking Israel when you're like, but basically NATO is also on the side of Israel, so it's not little Israel on its own. It's like NATO plus Israel against a lot of very poor nations.
Well, and it's also that these countries aren't really, with the exception of the Houthis, who really did just sort of jump into this and say, what's that? I don't even know what that means. Leroy Jenkins, just
hold my beer.
Yeah, basically, the Houthis absolutely jumped into this out of nowhere. In every other case, it is absolutely the Israelis attacking, not being attacked. October 7th isn't really an exception to this. What October 7th was a phenomenally, horrifically successful prison riot or uprising in a Warsaw ghetto. Like, this is not, there's no way you can say that Hamas started the fight with Israel. That is ludicrous. Also, I would argue that you can't really say, though Hezbollah made some very poor choices, and what has happened to Hezbollah over the past week is actually a war, is actually a military victory by Israel, not just a genocidal extermination, which is what they're doing in Gaza. I would also argue that Hezbollah sort of, started this as well. But just the sequencing of what's happened. Just thinking of a New York Times article I saw, was it this morning or yesterday? And I'm sure in the body of the article they probably didn't lie about this, but they say that, just the sequencing of stuff, they say, war is escalating because of Iran's missile attack and Israel's invasion of Lebanon. It's like, that's not the sequence here. That's not what happened.
But also Iran's both missile attacks haven't killed anyone. Or
Yes.
did debris land somehow on a Palestinian?
Well, that was what happened in April.
So one Palestinian has died from. No, no, I thought this is what happened recently
Well,
with
in
the
April,
most recent rocket attacks. Like, it seemed to be only one Palestinian has died from all of Iran's attacks.
well, it was the same. It was the same in April. It was one Bedouin girl who I think was injured in April, and it does seem like it was one Palestinian Israeli citizen who was killed by falling debris yesterday. That we know about. There are a lot of these attacks, which were much more severe yesterday on October 1st than they were on April 1st. A lot of them were against military bases, and Israel has a pretty strong form of military censorship, so we don't know for certain what happened on all of these bases. But yeah. So I guess just to talk, I guess we should talk about Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah, just how big this is. I would argue, and I would like to point out that I have always argued that Hezbollah is not, in fact, as impressive as everybody seems to think they are. This was not just on the part of the U.S. and Israeli governments who were trying to jack up defense budgets and make it seem as if Israel was somehow at the mercy of this rather small militia in southern Lebanon that didn't even have control over the entire country of Lebanon. It was also the Hezbollah has also been the subject of a lot of adoration from people who really, which is most people in the region, who really wanted to see somebody strike a blow against Israel. So everybody really has overhyped Hezbollah and what it is capable of and what it is. Not least among this hyping it up would be Hassan Nasrallah, the guy who was killed. I guess that was last Friday. So I have always said that actually the genesis of this outsized reputation for Hezbollah is a abortive, universally conceded to be failed invasion of Lebanon that Israel carried out in 2006. I have argued for a long time that, or certainly all year, that the Israel that went into Lebanon in 2006 was a very different Israel from the one we've seen over the past year. Israel has decided, not out of any justice, but they've decided because of this problem that they have created, the open-air prison Gaza that is run by Hamas, all of these things are things that Israel created, things that Israel supported, because of a scandalous misallocation of military resources, because Netanyahu and his government were more interested in beating up and killing the Palestinians that wanted to work with them in the West Bank. On October 7th, Hamas was able to pull off a pretty horrifically murderous uprising and managed to kill 700-odd Israeli citizens. The Israeli government has used that for now a year to completely take off any kind of humanitarian governors on what they used to do. If we just look at the body count of, I think, 4 days in September was something like 750 Lebanese were killed, some Hezbollah members, some, probably the majority, innocents. In all of the 2006 war, which was an entire month long, was a huge deal that everybody was reporting. This was an active conflict. In that entire war, only 1,100 Lebanese were killed. So certainly in the past month, even though the invasion started literally yesterday, over the past month, Israel has killed more people than they have killed in Lebanon than they killed in the 2006 war before the war actually started. I have always argued that that version of Israel that no longer cares about, basic decency and humanitarian cost was going to make rather quick work of Hezbollah, and that appears to be something that has happened. That said, even I am quite shocked at just how badly Hezbollah managed this period here. Like it's been quite stunning. We've got on September 17th, we've got the beeper explosion thing that was quite strange.
The pagers and some mobile phones, I think, as well.
Yes, pagers, and then I think on September 17th it was pagers, and then on September 18th it was walkie-talkies, is my understanding. Killed 37 Hezbollah operatives and innocent bystanders. Injured 3,000, was described, I think, by Leon Panetta, former U.S. defense official, as an act of terrorism.
Ability to be able to place an explosive in technology that is very prevalent these days, and turn it into a war of terror, really, a war of terror. This is something new.
Is it terrorism?
I don't think there's any question that it's a form of terrorism.
But really, I mean, just truly a stunning attack. Essentially, the Israelis managed to find out which beepers Hezbollah was buying and sabotaged all of them, which is quite extraordinary. And then on September 27th, and apparently, if I recall correctly, at some point a day or two after that, all of Hezbollah's leadership got together and were bombed, killing a whole bunch of them. And then on September 27th...
But didn't it kill an awful lot of civilians as well?
Well, so this was, I'm talking about two different attacks. Then on September 27th, it was the true top leadership of Hezbollah that was gathered in a suburb of Beirut. There's no telling how many people were killed. Essentially, Israel knocked down, I think, 3 high-rises on top of them, killing, I think estimates I've seen range from around 300 people in the process of killing Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. This guy had a tremendous reputation in the region and obviously in the country of Lebanon. I would say that Hezbollah is an organization that has been extraordinarily impressive in certain periods, but has allowed mission creep to take them in some pretty stupid directions. And Nasrallah has gotten his just desserts for those stupid directions. Next episode, we're going to devote all of next episode to a single bad tweet from Jared Kushner. And one of the things that he does that's very annoying in that bad tweet is he brings this all the way back to the 1983.
Yeah, it's just so far back, it's ridiculous. It's like getting revenge for something that happened before I was born.
It's 41 years ago, claiming that by killing Nasrallah, we've somehow taken vengeance for this attack against U.S. Marines. What happened back in 1983 was Ronald Reagan made the very bad choice to put a bunch of U.S. Marines into the middle of an active civil war in Lebanon, which Israel had also been invading, with the claim that we were somehow there to act as impartial arbiters, but with the very clear knowledge of everybody on the ground that we were there to sort of help and protect Israeli interests there. What did happen 41 years ago was a massive, massive bombing that killed a bunch of U.S. Marines. Now, what's kind of farcical about this is that Jared Kushner blames this on Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah was, the bombing took place in 1983, Hezbollah was formed in 1985.
Yes, but everything's Iran, and since they're linked to Iran, it's definitely a revenge.
Yes, and I think a lot of people take it as given that Iran was responsible for this bombing. I don't think it's anywhere near that well established. What is well established, and I'll be honest, I don't mind, is that one of the people who is likely directly responsible for that bombing did later join Hezbollah and was among the figures that Israel has killed over the past couple weeks. And I think that's great, honestly. Doesn't bother me. I'm very okay with the killing of Ibrahim Akil. The idea, though, that this somehow has adds some kind of cosmic justice to what Israel, a flatly genocidal apartheid state, has been doing and is been doing, is insane. The fact is that Israel invaded Lebanon in the 1980s. Hezbollah, more than any other actor, but along with a lot of other actors, successfully kicked Israel out of Lebanon after almost 2 decades of struggle in the year 2000. In the year 2000, Hezbollah was internationally well regarded because it was a really impressive thing that they had done. It was the true resistance. It was true resistance. It successfully kicked out Israel. It successfully defeated Israel militarily, which was extraordinary. Now, let's be clear about what that means. This does not mean that, in head-to-head tank battles, Hezbollah and Israel went up against each other and Hezbollah won. It means that in an area where the population rightly loathed the Israeli invader, Hezbollah was able to successfully carry out a guerrilla war that kicked Israel out. that was phenomenal. Hezbollah is rightly praised for that. After that, they made a really stupid decision that we're currently watching the Houthis in Yemen make right now, which was to decide that actually our organization doesn't really have much viability as like the victorious resistance folks. It doesn't, we're not going to have as much purchase in politics in Lebanon if we're not actively fighting Israel. So Hezbollah went and picked a fight, and that was a really stupid thing to do. But it paid off, or it seemed to pay off for Hezbollah for quite some time. I think because Hezbollah, at least for its first decade of sort of primetime celebrity, I mean, it was founded in 1985, but after winning in 2000, it did a good job of sticking to its local focus for a while, and it would cause problems with Israel on the border, which long-term was pretty stupid, but sort of continue to look heroic. And then Israel would try to jump into Lebanon, as they did in 2006, and it wouldn't go well for Israel. This was a good way to become very popular in the Arab world, the Middle East, probably the global South more generally, though I couldn't speak to that. But before they made this decision to pick fights with Israel after they'd kicked Israel out, I think they were well regarded in Europe. I think they were even begrudgingly well regarded in the United States. But this choice to pick fights with Israel after Israel had been kicked out allowed them to become sort of like the terrorists, one of the sort of standard terrorist names or what have you. The choice that they made that actually lost them a lot of friends in the Arab world was they decided to back up, or rather Iran decided for them that they should back up Assad in 2011. And that created a lot of division in really like what, the anti-Israel coalition in the Arab world was kind of ripped to shreds by that. And I think it's that choice, actually. I've seen a lot of...
What made them choose that path?
Iran, essentially. IGRC and Iran, I think, made a completely unsurprising, not at all sinister choice to back up Assad. The Assad regime had been an ally of Iran for decades, and it made sense for Iran to try to preserve the Syrian government against a U.S. and Saudi-funded jihadist assault. That made sense. Actually, Hezbollah did a lot of good in defeating the Islamic State, but also they were shoring up Assad, who was a brutal dictator. So Hezbollah did that because Iran is definitely pulling the strings on Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah's origins are as the Shia population of Lebanon, which was always incredibly looked down upon. When independent Lebanon was set up in, I want to say, the late 1940s and into the Civil War of 1975, it was mostly about Sunni elites and Christian elites against each other. That was what the political system was about. There were, of course, there were Druze, there were Shia, there were all kinds of other factions.
Well, yes, famously multicultural.
Yes. But the main story in Lebanon was Sunni versus Christian. This was set up in the politics. By the time the nasty civil war broke out in 1975, and obviously refugee Palestinians were another huge factor in that, the Shia of Lebanon found themselves in the middle of everybody and not doing very well. And that is sort of where Hezbollah's origin story is as those put upon Shia who were just sort of losing out in Lebanon before the Civil War, losing out in Lebanon during the Civil War. And something that they latched onto was something that happened in 1979, which was the Shia revolution in Iran. So from the get-go, before they had any other friends, the revolutionary government in Iran had a natural affinity with all of these Shia, put upon Shia in Lebanon. So they sort of grew together, really. So a lot of people like to talk about the Houthis in Yemen as unthinking Iranian proxies, and that's absolutely not true. The Houthis are a very different animal. Hezbollah is more of a unthinking Iranian proxy. Despite the incredible charisma and political power of Hassan Nasrallah, the guy who was just killed, he pretty much did what Iran wanted. And going into Syria, becoming a transnational actor, kind of destroyed Hezbollah's reputation in a lot of the region. And also, I've seen some reporting that indicates that it was actually this choice that opened up Hezbollah's sort of systems to made them more vulnerable to Israeli intelligence penetration, which is something that has clearly happened. So that was sort of like a poor choice all around. And I think just more broadly, like I'm going to be talking a lot about in this episode and next episode of just how delusional a lot of responses to the death of Nasrallah are. But I think it is worth pointing out that like this whole axis of resistance philosophy, this whole approach seems to have mostly functioned, certainly over the past year, but I think probably for some time longer than that, it has mostly functioned in helping Israel commit genocide. I think that's really my main takeaway.
Is it just a great distraction?
It is providing and that's exactly what it's doing this week. It is providing the justification for Israel's ideology of everybody's out to get us, despite the fact that they never really managed to kill many Israelis, with the very shocking, very brief, once in a lifetime lightning strike exception of October 7th. All of these resistance groups, there's really just not a lot to them. They're not very successful. Iran is a big, impressive country with a growing military component, but they're rather a long way away from Israel. And these local actors that are supposedly so threatening to Israel are mostly just public relations, just so whenever somebody goes on a U.S. cable media show and says, I think maybe Israel's doing a little too much bad stuff, they're like, why do you support Hamas? Why do you support Hezbollah? And I think that, honestly, if you look at Iranian activity over the past year, I think they're kind of getting that point. I think they might be kind of realizing, oh, wait a second, all we're really doing with this axis of resistance nonsense is facilitating genocide. I know, because I've said this on Twitter, and people are outraged when I point that out. Like, how can you not, support the heroic efforts of Hamas and Hezbollah? And it's just like, because I see the results. I get it. If I were an Arab guy in the region, I'd be like, yeah, of course, they're finally, standing up for our dignity and da-da-da-da-da-da. But objectively, from the outside, someone who is, would really like to not have my tax dollars commit genocide, it's just blatantly obvious that this whole axis of resistance is basically just Israeli cover. It allows Israel to do what it wants. And we're definitely seeing that in some of this insane Jared Kushner tweet we'll talk about next episode. Is a lot of people are like, oh, everything's changed now. We've killed Nasrallah. Now we're gonna, maybe we can go back into Syria. Maybe we can. It's time to take out Iran's nuke sites, because they kind of realize that, oops, maybe we went a little too far here. Maybe we've killed the golden goose. And I think in killing Nasrallah, in taking out this mythologically evil figure, I think that they have kind of killed the golden goose a little bit.
That you've shown that basically Hezbollah is not that impressive.
Exactly. And it also prompts the question, geez, if they were able to do all of this to Hezbollah so quickly, like over the course of a month, they've utterly dismantled their leadership and destroyed the communication networks, then what exactly have they been doing against the much weaker Hamas in Gaza over the past year? Or is it possible that they're not actually going after Hamas in Gaza at all? That they're just sort of allowing those networks to persist so that they can justify continuing the genocide? I think that's there's a lot of support for that.
A strong possibility.
But it is worth saying that this attack against Lebanon is a war. It is not an extermination, as is happening in Gaza, despite the fact that it is sort of entirely ginned up by Israel and the United States to sell more weapons. It is an actual war. It is an actual conflict.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it is worth pointing out that, Hezbollah put itself in this position in the aftermath of October 7th. I think that Hezbollah, I'm not entirely certain, the degree to which Hezbollah chose to get into an accelerated artillery duel or missile duel with Israel after October 8th, but they really shouldn't have. I think is now pretty clear. they haven't actually helped Gaza at all, and they have absolutely provided an excuse for Israel to continue the violence in Gaza. And I think it's just another illustration of kind of how impotent this axis of resistance has been. The fact remains that I think starting on October 7th or October 8th, the different things say different things. Hezbollah and Israel, who regularly do trade missiles back and forth with at a much slower pace. Since 2006, there have been back and forths between Israel and Hezbollah. One of them started on October 7th or October 8th and has not finished. It is ongoing today. And that was a really poor choice, I think, on Hezbollah's part. You could make an argument. I don't think it's a very good argument because I don't actually think that Hezbollah had this capacity anyway, that if on October 7th they had decided to go whole hog and said, you know what, we're joining in with Hamas, we're going to go, we're going to bomb Tel Aviv, we're going to send our cadres in to try and take back northern Israel, we're going to go nuts. I think that would have failed miserably as well, but it would have made a lot more sense than we're just going to allow this sort of ongoing back and forth tit for tat thing going, because it was essentially allowing Israel.
What's the point of that? Is it to sort of look like you're doing something knowing that the Iron Dome is going to stop it? So, because it's, it's something like nearly 2,000 Hezbollah cross-border attacks have been committed since October 7th. Like, because you're not going to get through that Iron Dome unless you're firing 100,000. Like, what's the point of all this?
The point is to maintain deterrence and to say that they're doing something. I remember I don't know if this was November or December. There was, for a week, everybody was like, Nasrallah is going to make a speech. And we were all worried about it. And like, what is it going to mean? Is he going to dive into this war whole hog? Is Iran going to jump in? Da, 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 da. And he sort of gave the speech saying, Hamas is handling it, which was like seen correctly as like a huge back down or what have you. And I think it is worth pointing out that, like, as insane as it seems, what was going on between October 7th and September 6th for 11 months was kind of an accelerated version of normal for Israel and Lebanon, of sort of going back and forth. It's worth pointing out that according to, I think it's Akhled or something, reported in Al Jazeera, 82% of the attacks in the north since October 7th had been Israeli. Israel was doing most of this.
Wow.
And Hezbollah was, I think they say, it was something along the lines of 1,700 odd attacks by Hezbollah and like 6,000 odd attacks by Israel.
Does Hezbollah have any sort of missile interception technology? I assume it doesn't.
No, nowhere near on the same level as the Iron Dome. Like different generations of technology.
Oh, yeah.
I maybe.
Oh, so they have some, but
I can't speak to, you know I'm not big on the military technology,
okay.
but I
but
would
you know
assume.
what I mean? It's like when Israel doesn't attack, it's very likely it's going to hit its target, while when Hezbollah does, it's very likely it's just going to explode in the sky.
Well, from October 7th to September 6th, Hezbollah attacks killed 32 Israelis. But from October 7th to September 6th, Israeli attacks killed 646 Lebanese. So 20 times more. And it is interesting because honestly, until I researched this morning, I was like, hey, you know what? Like, this really was just incredibly stupid and aggressive of Hezbollah to do this. It was Hezbollah who chose to jump in on October 8th. And I'm like, actually, no, it was, I think, Hezbollah trying desperately to maintain this level of deterrence that they'd had since September 6th. But also they can't come out and say, hey, chill, it was, but they, because that's not the personality of Hezbollah. That's not the reputation they're attempting to preserve. But if you look at these numbers, I think it's pretty clear that Israel was doing most of the bombing, which is absolutely not the story that we're hearing in U.S. media. In U.S. media, we're hearing about how these attacks meant that northern Israel was completely depopulated. And it was just this crazy thing that Hezbollah was maintaining when in fact Israel was doing most of the bombing. Now, that's from Al Jazeera reporting. Maybe they're putting a different spin on it that is somehow inaccurate. But I was given a little pause because I was very much buying this story that, this was this aggressive choice that Hezbollah made. I'm not so sure it was aggressive. I'm still pretty sure it was pretty stupid. like a ludicrously dumb thing to allow themselves.
Do you think it's possible to keep command of so many personnel if they are constantly being attacked, let's say, by Israel? Because command can only be so good in an organization like this. Like, if they're constantly being attacked, these young men have access to rockets, and you keep telling them, no, don't fire back, don't fire back. Like, do you not think it's inevitable they're going, to hell with it, I'm firing them. They keep firing at us.
That's a really good point for Hamas. So Hamas, it's very clear that Hamas does not have anything like full control of the armed elements of the Gaza resistance. Like, there are different groups, there are different, it's not entirely clear, we'll really never know, like, to what extent which atrocities committed on October 7th were actually Hamas proper, or were another group, or were just a bunch of, like, angry kids who finally had something like freedom for the first time. Like, we just don't know who was responsible for what happened. Hezbollah has a different reputation. What you say could be entirely accurate, but I think Hezbollah has a reputation as this serious military force with a hierarchy and like and I don't know. I mean, maybe that is part of it, that they can't restrain people from shooting back. But I don't think that's Hezbollah's reputation, and I think there are indications that Hezbollah has acted with kind of extraordinary restraint. Especially if you just look at that math there, over the past year, 32 Israelis were killed and 646 Lebanese were killed. So I think that is an example of a lot of Hezbollah. So I think it's really important to point out that it was not, I think that's being lost a little bit, that as dumb as it was for Hezbollah to allow itself to get entrapped in this tit for tat with Israel over the past year, it was not like dramatically out of character from the way that these folks have interacted. What is dramatically out of character for the way these folks have interacted is the way that Israel has chosen to escalate things over the past. Well, they tried it. Basically, they tried it back in April, and it wasn't so much with Hezbollah. It was more with Syria and Iran directly. April 1st, 2004, they blew up an Iranian consulate in Syria, killing a whole bunch of Iranian military figures. In U.S. media, it's just assumed that it's okay and fine for Israel and the United States to kill Iranian military figures in Syria. And I think that's kind of insane.
Yeah.
But that's just normal. It's just,
absolutely.
It's just A-okay. Why would anybody have any problem with that? Which is lunacy.
Well, I was always just interested if you just tell people the exact same news, but you switch the countries around, and to see how angry they would be. Because it should be, if you're being neutral, it should be, as equally disgusting or fine to kill these people just because I don't like that country.
Well, there was this amazing, so apparently Mossad's headquarters is in downtown, one is of an Israeli city close to a hospital. I don't know if this actually happened on CNN, but certainly on Twitter, people are like, how dare Iran hit near a hospital or in the middle of a city? And it's just like, are you listening to yourself? Are you listening to yourself? Which is because, of course, the constant, explanation for why all these people have been murdered in Gaza is, well, Hezbollah, Hamas is using them as human shields. Well, then the Mossad is using Tel Aviv as a human shield. But that's that kind of equity. So it's just assumed as like normal and fine that Israel is blowing up people who are trying to save the Syrian government in Syria. It's crazy. But they went a little far on April 1st and killed enough people and blew up an actual Iranian diplomatic facility that took it too far. So on April 13th, and it's important to talk about April 13th versus what happened on October 1st, Iran chose on April 13th to attack Israel directly for the first time on a massive scale. However, the way that this was done was quite
bizarre.
It was bizarre. It was essentially negotiated. It was a negotiated attack with the United States and the Biden administration at this point, which is sort of like, well, obviously we defend Israel no matter what, but we also obviously admit that Israel has stepped over here. So there was not direct conversation between the U.S. and Iran, but I believe through Oman, basically Israel and the United States were told more or less what Iran would be trying to hit in Israel. So all of it could be either A, intercepted, or B, evacuated. Also, what was sent,
Kind of, were they not aiming at something that didn't really have anyone in it?
yes, there was it was not, it was an attack intended to demonstrate demonstrate capacity. Importantly, they sent 300 missiles and drones. I mean, drones is essentially like, so these things were just sort of like, we've launched our drones, and 3 hours later, they would make it to Israel.
Well, they're essentially remote control airplanes, like
Yes.
that just have much better batteries than, say, you would have got in the 90s, and they have explosives on them. So yeah, the idea that they're very low tech and yes, incredibly slow.
But they also sent some ballistic missiles on April 13th. On October 1st, it was 180 ballistic missiles. These were launched, and 12 minutes later, they were hitting in Israel. Iron Dome can't do anything.
Much more
about
sophisticated.
These. Some of these missiles were intercepted.
Is there not another interception technology, the Arrow or something?
I don't know anything about the weapon systems. I know that there's Iron Dome.
That's meant for ballistics.
Entirely possible, Ray. Entirely possible. The weapon systems are not my forte.
But a lot of NATO countries were involved in shooting these down.
Yes. So I do know that U.S. naval assets.
And Britain had confessed that it was helping as well.
Yes. So it's not just Iron Dome, but Iron Dome plus whatever Aegis systems and Arrow systems and this, that, and the other thing, it appears were not anywhere near as successful as stopping just 180 missiles. This is not a lot of missiles. This is like 3 minutes of a conflict between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. But those 180 missiles appear to have mostly, and I mostly overstates it, but a lot of them have hit their targets in Israel. We're not going to get clear answers on that. People have pointed out that after April 1st, the U.S. and Israeli governments were proudly boasting about stopping 99% of missiles. Now there are much vaguer statements being made on October 1st. Like, we stopped a whole bunch of them. We promise. And there's footage, there's simple footage, the extraordinary footage of missiles raining down on a military base in Israel. That is not what is advertised. This is not what the Iron Dome is supposed to allow to happen. So escalation happening on a lot of grounds. So how did we get to October 1st? Well, the thing is that Israel has been trying to make this happen since July. The end of July specifically. On July 30th, they killed a highly ranked Hezbollah person in Beirut. That was the first sort of outside of the norm thing. Beirut was, something that Israel hadn't really hit much since 2006. Like that was sort of off. That was used to be off the table. That was an indication of Israel's conflict with Hezbollah beginning to be pushed in a different direction. And then on July 31st, Israel killed the head of Hamas that they were supposedly negotiating a ceasefire with in Tehran, which is this is the capital of Iran. Which is a pretty extraordinary violation of Iranian sovereignty. That was a big deal, and my expectation was that, Iran's now going to have to hit back and hit back harder. I think that's what Israel wanted. That was Israel's expectation. This was Israel's attempt to launch a large war with Iran that the United States would be compelled to get into. And Iran refused to do it. All of August, all of September passed without any serious repercussions from Iran, which is pretty extraordinary. Though instantly, the way that Washington, D.C., or many figures in Washington, D.C. were portraying this was as weakness and, Iran's actually, it's that schizophrenic, they're this incredible, terrible evil, and actually they're incredibly weak, and all we have to do is be tough and we'll push them over. That was proven not to be the case on Tuesday, October 1st, but it is worth pointing out that Iran, for a solid month, and the Iranians have come out and claimed, and I actually think this is more or less likely to be true, that they believed that Biden was attempting to get a ceasefire in Gaza, and they held off because they were beginning to see that this whole axis of resistance strategy was basically just providing excuses for further genocide. And to be clear, it worked tremendously well. In April, Israel didn't get the war that it wanted, but it got the reporting that it wanted. It got this is a conflict between Israel and Iran, and Gaza just sort of fell down the news agenda for a while. That is, of course, also what has happened over the past month. Now that we've been, Lebanon, Iran, Israel, we're not paying any attention to the ongoing bombings, yes, that are happening in Gaza, but the much more horrific lack of medical services, disease, famine that is beginning to stalk Gaza and is continuing to stalk Gaza and kill people in larger numbers.
Seem to be starting from about the first month.
Yes.
I know what a child that's starved to death looks like, so that's horrific. And that was very early on. I didn't mean to see it. It just comes up in your feed, and it's only gotten worse.
I've gotten pretty good. I've gotten pretty good. I when I'm scrolling through Twitter, I just don't. If there's a picture, I
don't stop.
I don't look at it. No, like my eyes just sort of tune it out. Because that's just a necessary self-defense strategy when learning about Israel's crimes. So yeah, it's important to so Israel didn't get the war it wanted in April, but it did get Gaza sort of pushed off the news agenda exactly the way it wanted as it's gotten over. So end of July. So in August, Israel was hoping for this big retaliation. It did not materialize. So in September, they started really stepping things up. They started stepping things up in Lebanon specifically. They have been, we had the pager attacks September 17th, September 18th. Then September 27th, they took out Nasrallah and the leadership of Hezbollah. This is pretty extraordinary. I mean, Nasrallah is sort of seen as...
It seems to be all of them, from what I understand. Like, all of the leadership is dead.
Pretty much. Like it does kind of seem like there was a TV show with Kiefer Sutherland a ways back where they apparently there's a designated survivor.
24.
No, he did nowhere near as successful
yes.
as 24. It's called Designated Survivor, which is
Yes.
essentially there's one member of the U.S. government doesn't go to the State of the Union address because if they blow up the State of the Union address, somebody's there to run the government. Yeah, I think with the Hezbollah leadership, we're sort of down to sub-designated survivor status. I mean, they really extraordinary.
Yes,
and at that point, perhaps with the ground invasion that launched yesterday morning, Iran said, okay, we've got to do this. And I think that's honestly a pretty good judgment because of the way that people were talking specifically. I kind of almost wonder if Iranian government decided to bomb Israel on the strength of Jared Kushner's tweet. Probably not.
No.
But to have the main Middle East advisor of Donald Trump come out and essentially say, it's clear that Iran is weak and is in tatters and the way is clear to taking out Iran. Iran just sort of had to be like, no, we were waiting for this diplomacy that it turns out the Biden administration was lying to us about and had decided to hit back. I feel like they kind of had to, but it's important to emphasize that even with this attack, even with cruise missiles that get there in 12 minutes, even with, instead of 2 weeks of notice and negotiation, essentially a long weekend of it, they were very careful not to kill anybody. Iran really doesn't want this wider war. What we're waiting on now, and I think we're very likely to have seen by the end of, by the time this is published, is Israeli retaliation against this attack. And who knows what it's going to be. I think
because they're very upset about one Palestinian being killed.
Yes. Well, this is, and in April, the Biden administration did manage to restrain them and get them to, I think they did one missile attack on an Iranian airport or something. I think that's going to be a harder sell now because of how the lather that the Israeli government, the Israeli public, and Washington, D.C. have built themselves up into. They really like the idea of, oh, yeah, look at us, we've killed Nasrallah, we're changing everything. I think it would be nice if this Iranian attack would make people in Washington, D.C. think a little but I think it's unlikely. And I think that we're probably going to see some serious bombing of Iran, and then some more serious bombing of Israel, and then entirely possible, not 100% going to happen, but entirely possible that we're going to be in a very serious war by the end of the month.
But is it true that the Israeli financiers seem to think that Israel's, even if they were to end everything right now, is still heading towards incredibly bleak times because so much investment has left the country and there's a huge amount of brain drain? I think the idea was you can come to Israel and you'll be 100% safe. It's as if you're in America. And they're finding out that that's not quite true. So they're fair weather citizens and they're way back to wherever they're originally from. And it's pretty difficult for Israel right now.
Oh, I think the Israeli economy is in dire straits. I think that, but I think that the whole, Israel's threatened by this, Israel's having, I think there's a lot of folks who desperately want to believe that Hamas and Hezbollah are having some kind of deep-seated effect on Israel. And I'd say they're just not. I think they're having a deep-seated moral effect on Israel and the United States. Like they are, as I think Ta-Nehisi Coates was putting it, like they are burning our souls. I mean, we are becoming worse evils than we could imagine. We are committing worse evils than we can imagine. Like it is a moral travesty, a moral defeat of extraordinary extent. But all this like, look at all these people who are flying to Europe. Well, yeah, so 100,000 Israelis flew to Europe. As soon as the fighting's over, they can fly back. The Israeli economy is definitely suffering. But it's actually like a successful, impressive Israeli economy is really kind of like a new development. Like they spent a lot of the first half century of Israel was as kind of like a barracks garrison state. If they go back there for 4 or 5 years, like there's plenty of rich people who are happy to take them back out of it. So no, I don't think, and I think just how quickly Hezbollah, big scary leader Nasrallah was demolished is an indicator that actually there is no real threat to Israel here. This sort of building up of the threat to Israel is actually just propaganda to keep the genocide going. Not wittingly. I'm not saying that people but I think a lot of people who are sort of falling for these Israel's on the ropes ideas are really just sort of doing the IDF's work for them because it's that perception of weakness.
It's not just NATO on their side, it's also the likes of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a lot.
Like it's always just meant, you keep seeing these maps and it's like, poor little Israel surrounded, but it's like, it's hard to win anything when you've got all those countries on your side.
And Egypt, crucially.
And for some reason, America is very happy to just, and Egypt as well. I'm just looking at everyone that helped out in the missile attacks that Iran did.
Well, if you told me...
Because there was still intelligence being provided by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates.
If you told me a year ago that Egypt, even Egypt under Sisi, would have just sort of sat there and maybe complained a little bit as Israel killed supposedly 41,000, but probably more likely 250,000 Palestinians in Gaza, I would have been shocked. But that's what happened. This is not a conflict that Israel has ever been in any kind of danger of losing. And what's happening with this victory against Hezbollah is a bunch of people just getting excited and chomping at the bit and definitely falling into hubris. Israel is in no danger from Hezbollah, is in no danger Hamas, but Israel can absolutely do itself and the United States extraordinary damage and the world extraordinary damage, the world more than the United States, frankly, if they are convinced, if they manage to convince the United States to go on yet another $1 trillion crusade, which is, of course, what Jared Kushner wants, what most of the Biden administration wants, and what we'll be talking about at length next week when we talk about Jared Kushner's incredibly bad tweet. One thing I do want to say that just to talk about just this ground invasion and how stupid it is, Israel is in no danger from Hamas or Hezbollah within Israel. If Israel chooses to go and do a massive ground invasion, it's unclear what it is they've decided to do to start launching. At this point, a day later, we don't know.
Yeah.
If they're really just going to take out a few missile launches along the border and duck out, okay. But if they're really going to try like a serious occupation, it will not go well for them. There's this illusion that, oh, we took out the leadership of Hezbollah. They're on their knees. Everything's easy now. They're hiding in the tunnels or whatever. That's already been disproven. We're about 24 hours, maybe 36 hours into the ground invasion of Lebanon. And I've seen anywhere between 8 to 15 Israeli soldiers have been killed. In the entire year of Gaza destruction, causing, I believe, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, Israel has lost 330-odd soldiers. That is less than a soldier a day. And I think the largest casualty event for Israeli soldiers was, I think 20 of them managed to blow up a building on themselves. So, it's not a real war. It's like an extermination where occasionally, they can't keep exterminating if there isn't somebody nominally shooting back at them. So occasionally a few soldiers die, but in Hezbollah, the fact that in a single day, something like 10 Israeli soldiers have been killed, this is already a more significant fight by far than what has happened in Gaza with Hamas. And I do believe that if Israel were to seriously attempt to occupy southern Lebanon again, I think they would find themselves, even with their expanded rules of engagement and they've already killed many more people than they killed in the 2006 war and will continue to do so. But even with that, I think it's likely to be much, much more costly. Hezbollah is not gone.
And the other issue you can run into is it's very possible that leadership maybe was not the best. So by wiping them out, you maybe bring in a new generation that have a lot more dynamic ideas and are much better at fighting Israel. So you can also do that.
Or are more willing to fight. The generation that they wiped out were a bunch of guys who were young, tough, fighting hotheads in the 1980s. These are dudes in their 60s who were probably who were content to sit back and see themselves, and build their reputations, whereas the people that replaced them could actually be...
Because they did seem to get a lot of the spoils in Lebanon, while the economy in Lebanon has been abysmal with hyperinflation. A lot of these Hezbollah and people associated with Hezbollah seem to get a much better treatment than the average Lebanese person.
Oh, yeah. Well, Lebanon is... I really went deep a year or two back, studied Lebanon a lot, and wanted to put out some videos, and then I was just like, it is just so much of a mess, and there's nothing positive to say. We could talk about Lebanon we could do weeks of episodes on Lebanon.
Well, apparently it's an incredibly beautiful country with an incredible nightlife, but maybe we'll not be going there anytime soon.
Yeah, I went to Lebanon went to Beirut back in 2011. Had an amazing weekend, just sort of partying in some Ottoman mansion.
Wow!
But that is not something I'm doing anytime soon. That's for sure.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire: What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.